After 13 years in prison for murder, Kaj Linna has been set free. Following a retrial in 2017, he was found not guilty of a 2005 conviction. Linna was awarded a record sum of 18 million krona, which is equivalent to 2 million USD. And this is Linna's Spanish language teacher from prison. After marrying, the pair moved to the Canary Islands.
Law prohibits what the majority decide is wrong. Law directs what is agreed to be right. The city in which you live has laws which control you. In a democracy, such laws and social controls belong to the people who live under them. These laws are yours. To make wisely, to change intelligently, to understand and live by.
This is the last living photo of the Lindbergh brothers. 10 days later, Sune was brutally attacked and Roger was murdered. Home care staff working for Mr. Sune Lindbergh arrived at the residence to find him severely injured. Sune was bound with ropes, unable to call for help. Sune was the only found survivor. His brother Roger was found beaten to death in the barn. It was rumored that the Lindbergh brothers kept large amounts of cash at their home. They owned large tracts of rich forestry land in the Arctic Circle. News reports claim that many in town knew the brothers had a large safe at home. Sune suffered a stroke in 1994 and as a result was left partially paralyzed. The brothers lived together on the farm, with Robert taking care of Sune after the stroke. The brothers were last spotted in town on April 14, 2004. The attack is believed to have occurred that night, approximately around 8 p.m. It is believed that the attacker entered the barn through an elevated side window. It is reported that around 7:40 p.m., a nearby neighbor spotted the legs of a person who had crawled into the barn through a small opening. After mentioning the occurrence to his wife, the two decided not to take any further action to warn the brothers. That window led directly to a crawl space with a hatch that dropped into the first floor of the barn. After attacking and bounding Robert in the barn, the perpetrator moved on to the main house in search of the safe. The home's alarm service confirmed that during the span of 8:05 to 8:30 p.m., the system was deactivated. Sune was likely attacked shortly after. By Sune's account, a masked man entered the room and instructed him to lie down, and demanded, "Where is the safe?" Wielding a wooden post, Sune claims that the man said, "You see this blood on this wood? There will be more. Where is the safe?" Sune was struck numerous times with the wooden post and bound with his own rope. He was covered with a blanket and left to die. safe in question had no more than 3,000 kronar, which is roughly equivalent to 312 USD. The brothers kept nearly all their money at the bank. The attacker left the farm and took off north toward Robert's car. It would be almost 2 days later until soon, and the deceased Robert would be found. Soon would identify the voice he heard as a man he'd previously conducted business with, known as Bertil. Bertil was apparently in a financial dispute with the brothers, which had been settled 2 months prior to the murder. Bertil also provided the police with an alibi, but more importantly, 2 names that he suspected were involved with the incident. Linna was nowhere to be found, but the authorities were able to locate Niles in a nearby town. Once apprehended, he gave details so vivid that suspicion grew of his involvement. However, much like Bertil, he pointed towards Linna and claimed that Linna had told him the Lindbergh brothers' night routine and mentioned the hiding spot of the barn. It was revealed that the 3 were mutual acquaintances. Kaj and Bertil had sold the brothers a safe in 1999, and that Kaj and Niles had been previously convicted for robbing a Swedish supermarket chain, ICA. It was later revealed during a 2017 trial that Bertil and Niles were expecting a sum of payment from the brothers in 2004, but never received said payment. Niles had convinced the police that Linna was the #1 suspect, and a manhunt began for the 42-year-old. Surprisingly, this led authorities to Swansea, Wales. 3 months after the death of Roger Lindbergh, South Wales police nabbed Kaj Linna in a cyber cafe. Swedish police had tracked his location using his active Hotmail address. Kaj was married at the time and the father of 2 teenagers. He did not put up a fight and was shortly extradited back to Sweden to face questioning. Niles' witness account to the police described the 2 of them taking a trip to Kalamark the day before the murder, with Niles going only to persuade Linna to not commit the crime. Although no DNA evidence was found at the scene to link Linna to the crime, the testimony of Niles would be enough to convict Linna for murder and robbery. During April 2005, Kaj Linna was given a life sentence, with the prosecution only aided by circumstantial evidence. It didn't take long for DN reporter Stefan Lesinski to find holes in the conviction of Linna. As early as June 2006, Lesinski made it clear with the headline, "False testimony convicted Kaj Linna of murder." Lesinski identified the key discrepancies in the case, including the fact that Niles never actually saw Linna at the farm, that the only source connecting Linna to the crime was the previously mentioned Bertil. The cell phone records also failed to prove anything concrete, other than the fact that Linna was in Skelfete about 11 p.m. Linna pushed for an appeal multiple times with the Swedish Supreme Court, but was repeatedly denied. His second attempt was noted in April 2009, where authorities chose to make the appeal entirely focus around one aspect of the case. Swedish authorities put all of their effort into reconstructing the window of the Lindbergh farm and recreating the break-in with 4 varied body types. In a tape that was played in court, police showed a man of comparable size to Linna successfully shuffling into the small hole. His 2009 and 2010 appeals were both denied. However, in 2010, he received 2 out of 5 votes in favor of a retrial. The technical evidence included in the case was weak at best and held little connection to Linna. This included shoe tracks that were close in size to Linna's, a fingerprint that held no match, and the fact that Linna could theoretically fit through the barn window. Another major piece of overlooked evidence was the fact that Linna's cell phone pinged a tower in Vistrask around 6:12 p.m. The distance between the 2 locations is estimated to be an hour and 4 minutes at a minimum, with only a poor-maintained gravel road between. For Kaj to have made this trip, he would have needed to traverse roughly 77 kilometers by car and 3 kilometers by foot in under an hour and a half. This is the only way that Linna would have been able to be the same pair of legs that the neighbors spotted before 7:40 p.m. attempting to enter the barn window. One of the most vocal supporters of Linna's innocence was his own sister, Carita Postma Kakosalo. Fed up with the job of Swedish authorities, Carita drove to Kalamark in 2004 to conduct her own investigation. She confronted those who testified against Kaj and looked into the testimonies given surrounding the supposed car journey and the infamous missing trousers. Regarding the missing trousers, it is referring to another piece of evidence used by the prosecution. In the account given by the Lindbergh neighbor, the legs hanging out of the barn window were seen to be wearing a pair of blue jeans. It then just so happened that the woman who Linna rented a house from in southern Västtrask claimed that a pair of blue work trousers had gone missing from the house. The only problem is that those same missing trousers were eventually found behind a log in the house's basement. Carita's evidence was even used during Linna's first appeal in 2006 to no avail. Following the ruling, Carita decided to push the story into the hands of the Swedish media, particularly these two individuals. While Lisinski continued to use his post at the DN to question the verdict, Barkvall began to take a deep interest in the case and chronicling Linna's time in prison. Barkvall also initiated an interview with the mysterious Niles character. Without knowing it at the time, Barkvall had begun pulling at the only thread that would make Linna's release possible. During the 11th year of Linna's sentence, two new figures stepped forward to support his release. Following the massive critical success of the podcast Serial in late 2014, Berg and Johnson came together to form a similar spirited venture. After recommendations from star attorneys Thomas Olsen and Johan Eriksson, the pair decided to tackle the Kaj Linna case. When the pair came across the details of the Niles character, an opportunity to break the case wide open was realized. After securing his contact information from filmmaker Martin Barkvall, the two arranged a sit-down interview with a mysterious witness. The pair conducted a typical interview in which they asked Niles to retrace his memories and his knowledge of the Lindbergh brothers before the crime was committed. After a relatively boring account, Magnus Wiklund, otherwise known as Niles, asked the pair to switch off the recording device to say something off the record. Without realizing it at the time, or so they say, Johnson had set up a second microphone in the room to record atmospheric sounds. Wiklund continued to tell the pair that the purpose of his trip to Kalamark was far different than his initial testimony, and that it was actually for the purpose of meeting a drug dealer in Pattaya. After realizing what they recorded, the two contacted Wiklund to let him know. Oddly enough, he had no problems with them using the tape. Spar became an overnight hit and found massive success in Sweden. The podcast also hosted several high-level Swedish officials who seemed to echo the opinion that the Linna case was not handled properly. The podcast with Wiklund's interview was released in May 2015, and by December 2016, Linna was finally granted another appeal by the Swedish Supreme Court. Linna used the podcast clip in court as part of his official appeal. After serving 13 years in prison, the retrial was set for May 2017. Linna's case had become a major national story, so fittingly he enlisted the services of the flashy attorney Thomas Magnusson. Magnusson was an emphatic litigator and embraced the heavy media coverage they both received. He even worked diligently to address new pieces of evidence that surfaced in March and April, which featured a supposed wiretapped conversation between Magnus Wiklund and his father. "I'm not worried," Magnusson tells the Barometer. "It is quite clear that they know they are eavesdropped, so it is easy to dismiss." The tapes present an obvious indication that they were being monitored as Wiklund and his father stumbled through an explanation on why they were in Kalamark the day prior, in an attempt to discredit the podcast interview. If you called 0 drug dealers in Pattaya, then you can't just buy drugs from them. Wiklund also seemingly implicated a prior agreement with Linna stating, "I get my 17% of cash if he gets acquitted." Heading into the trial, there appeared to be a clear division of evidence that supported Linna against a portion of evidence that worked in the prosecution's favor. The first two major points supporting Linna was the discrediting of Wiklund's original story and the fact that his second cell phone connected to a tower in Pattaya at the same time he claimed to have been in Kalamark with Linna. Wiklund's interview with Spar and Martin Barkvall were both used in the court to support Linna's defense. Another supporting point is Linna's supposed trip from Pattaya to Kalamark. Although police managed to make the trip in the expected time frame, the hosts of Spar were unable to make the drive when met with snowy road conditions, comparable to the night of the murder. Additionally, a witness is said to have seen a cream-colored car parked in the Lindbergh lot, an obvious difference from Linna's red station wagon. As it would seem, in 2011, a near-identical case occurred in Langered. This case saw a double murder committed at an isolated farm in the country, resulting in the death of the 71-year-old elderly couple. Similar to the Lindbergh murder, it is suspected that the crime was committed by two people. The motive was driven by a suspected safe stored on the property. 2 Polish laborers were found escaping the country back to Poland and eventually convicted for murder. Miroslav Tabiz and Jacek Tabor had no prior connection to the elderly couple and denied all involvement in the crime. The last major piece of evidence in Linna's defense was the previously mentioned pair of missing blue pants, ultimately now disproved and irrelevant to the case. However, there are certainly a handful of points that supported the prosecution and raised important questions. Linna's lawyer understood that they ultimately needed to prove reasonable doubt, and that Linna's innocence was a tougher sell. Some points that seemed to raise suspicion was the fact that Kaj undeniably drove south towards Kalamark the night before the murder, and the night after the murder he escaped to the UK. It was also noted by the prosecution that Magnus Wiklund was too heavy to fit through the window, and that the witness Bertil had an alibi the night of the murder. Wiklund's intercepted phone calls also alluded to Linna's premeditation to rob the Lindbergh brothers, and details of Wiklund's account remained consistent with the actual details of the crime, so close in fact that he was arrested in late 2017 for suspicion of involvement with the crime. The last piece of evidence that seems to implicate his guilt was a spot of blood found on the towel of a witness in which Linna stayed the night following the murder. It is said that it is possible that it came from Linna's feet due to ill-fitting shoes, although this seems highly unlikely. As the trial wrapped up in May 2017, the courts concluded that the evidence presented at trial is insufficient and therefore cannot lead to a conviction. The decision on Linna's case marked the longest time spent in Swedish prison before being granted a retrial, which was 13 years. The 18 million kroner awarded in damages was also the highest amount ever given by the Swedish state. While in prison, Linna fell in love with Petra Woolrich, who happened to teach Kaj Spanish. The two fittingly eloped to the Spanish island of El Hierro within the Canary Islands, after eventually separating around late 2019. The inclusion of the podcast episode in court as evidence marked a first for the genre. The work of Spar hosts Anton Berg and Martin Johnson directly contributed to the release of Kaj Linna and set a precedent for true crime reporting moving forward. The true story of the Lindbergh murder remains a mystery to this day. Many still question the true involvement of Linna and the suspicious circumstances that led to his arrest. Was Linna just the fall guy for a failed robbery, or just a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time?